Cultivating wildflowers is one of the hottest areas of garden interest these days.
That's right. And here's one of the great all-American wildflowers, goldenrod. There's over 100 species in this country. Here it's growing happily with brown-eyed Susan and St. John's wort. I'm Barbara Damrosch.
And I'm Elliot Coleman. Stay with us for the next half hour, and we'll give you tips on growing wildflowers in your garden.
And we'll visit Garden in the Woods, the home of the New England Wildflower Society.
On Gardening Naturally.
People think that wildflowers are just weeds that belong along the roadsides or in the fields, but not in your yard.
You know, if you think about it, all of our cultivated plants were wildflowers at one point before they were domesticated. I picked this bouquet of flowers for Barbara from the vegetable garden. And what we have here are the flowers of Chinese cabbage, arugula, lettuce, and the tops of garlic.
That's fascinating. You would never think of lettuce being a wildflower, but somewhere in the world it must be.
And that's a good idea when you're trying to garden naturally. Maybe you should look at what's growing wild around you and then figure out how you can adapt that to your flower garden.
You'll find that there are wildflowers that start in early spring and ones that will take you all the way up into fall. The early spring ones tend to be woodland wildflowers, and the place I know around here that's the best to view them is Garden in the Woods in Framingham, Massachusetts. So I paid them a visit this year. Heather McCargo is in charge of propagation at Garden in the Woods, and she's going to give me a tour today. Heather, tell me a little bit about this garden.
The Garden in the Woods is the botanical garden of the New England Wildflower Society, and we're dedicated to the conservation and horticulture of North American wildflowers.
Well, you're doing a great job. I think the misty, moisty May weather we've been having this week has really brought it out. It's so lush and green here today, and a lot in bloom, too.
Yeah, most of the woodland wildflowers bloom in the spring before the leaves on the trees come out.
Well, that makes sense.
And right over here you can see some iris cristata, which is a little woodland iris.
Oh, isn't that cute? It doesn't look anything like the garden iris that people grow normally.
No, it's very easy to cultivate. It likes partial shade conditions, and it does not need to be wet, although it likes good garden soil.
Heather, the little lavender flower next to the iris looks like some of the perennial geraniums that I have in my garden, but it's probably a wild version, right?
Yeah, it's our native wild geranium, Geranium maculatum, and it's another woodland wildflower that makes a great garden plant.
If I put a little clump in, will it spread like that?
Yeah, if it's happy, it will feed all around your property.
Great. I noticed that you've got these planted just the way they would look in the wild. I mean, this looks like a woodland.
Yeah.
You have a clump of beech trees here, and under that canopy, they're just growing in very informal drifts. And the mulch that you've used, you know, it looked a lot like the forest floor.
Well, that's what we've tried to mimic here. We take the leaves and put them through a leaf shredder, which helps them become smaller pieces so the little plants can come up through them more easily in the spring. It also has a very neat and tidy look.
It does. Well, I bet it helps to conserve the moisture.
Yep, and it recycles the nutrients. That's how nutrients get recycled in the forest. The leaves fall down. That's how nature does it,
yeah. And it probably keeps some weeds down, too.
Yeah.
Make life easier for you.
Yeah.
Is that why you've done this path this way? It looks like it's something that's come out of a wood chipper.
That's what it is. We get a local tree guy to come by after he's done some pruning and do his chippings and deliver them here, and they make a great garden path.
Mm-hmm. How often do you have to put down this?
Because we're a public garden, we get a lot of traffic here, so we do it every year in the busy parts of our trails, but I think a homeowner could probably just do it every other year. Mm-hmm. And over time it breaks down, and again that recycles nutrients back into the forest.
Well, it's a nice natural look.
Yeah.
Are you expanding your gardens?
Yeah, we're expanding our plant conservation program and building a new horticulture building.
Oh, that's exciting. I'll have to come back and see that when it's finished. Boy, here's a pretty grouping. I love the way you've taken this rhododendron and let it kind of hang over several different kinds of wildflowers.
Yeah, this is the Carolina rhododendron. It's an evergreen rhododendron, and it's planted with the Labrador violet, which is one of our native violets that blooms in the spring and then has a pretty purplish cast to it throughout the summer. It does not need wet soil the way some of the violets do. And behind it is the Virginia bluebells, which is a true spring ephemeral, which means it means that after it blooms, the whole plant goes dormant, just the way a daffodil will. And usually in around early to mid-June, it completely disappears.
So you have to remember where it's going to come up the following year.
Yes.
I love the way you've incorporated the rocks into your garden. It looks very natural.
Well, it's kind of, it would be ridiculous to try to dig up all the rocks here, so instead we try to work with them.
Yeah. Now, I've noticed that the bluebell seems to be seeding itself in among the violets. It's making babies all over the place. What do you do about that? Do you police these plants at all?
Yeah, we periodically go through and thin them out, especially if they've seeded in somewhere we don't want. A lot of the plantings you'll see throughout the garden here have seeded in as opposed to us having planted every single one. But when they land somewhere that we don't want, all we do is pull it out and plant it somewhere else.
So they might be a little too big if they grew up and hid those violets, but somewhere back there they'd be okay.
Yes.
Great. Heather, the woods here are interesting. You have a very high canopy of oak trees and then some understory small trees. Did you plan your woods here?
Yeah, well, the natural woods here is about 100 years old. It's regrown farmland, and some of it has been thinned, and then we've planted some understory trees, which are wonderful for a shade garden or a woodland wildflower garden. This is the Carolina silverbell.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful? Those delicate little white bell flowers. And that, how tall will this tree get?
A very mature specimen could reach 40 feet, but that's quite an old tree. More typical is around 25 feet.
So it's a great tree for a small yard.
Yes.
I'm always looking for trees like that. Here's another one I bet would be perfect.
Yeah, that's redbud.
Another great native.
Yep. Has beautiful heart-shaped leaves in the summertime.
And those lovely pink flowers. Native vines are important in a wildflower garden too, aren't they, Heather?
Yeah, they're an important part of a natural landscape. That is the native honeysuckle, Lonicera sempervirens. And it blooms all summer long with these lovely red flowers, and it attracts hummingbirds.
Oh, well, I'd plant it just for the hummingbirds alone, but it would be nice to have something long blooming.
Yeah.
I love the simple way you're displaying it and training it. You've just put a piece of green wire fence against that building, and it's doing its thing.
Very easy to do.
Yeah. This is a great little spot here because you've got so many different species in a very small area.
You don't need a big garden to have a wildflower garden. You can tuck it into any little spot in your yard.
This is a really pretty plant with a lacy foliage and the pink flowers.
That's the wild bleeding heart, Dicentra eximia, and it blooms all summer long.
Unusual for a woodland plant.
Yeah, it is. It also is quite adaptable to full sun conditions as well as shade.
Interesting. Well, what's the yellow one behind it, that yellow flower?
That's the Celadine poppy, Stylophorum diphyllum, and it has pretty 2-inch across yellow flowers in late May and June. Also here is bloodroot. This is one of our first woodland wildflowers to bloom. It has white flowers with yellow centers before the leaves come out, and then for the rest of summer you have these pretty leaves.
Yeah, even though it's gone by, I'd love to have that in my garden all summer. And look how nice it is next to that fern. The foliage contrasts that you can make in a woodland garden are wonderful.
Yep.
And look what's hiding in there. Jack in the pulpit.
Erythema triphyllum. That's one of the most wonderful woodland wildflowers, I think. Children love it because it's such an unusual flower, and it's quite an easy one to grow.
And it teaches you to look closely in a shade garden with wildflowers. The effects are often very subtle in it. Get up close to them.
And looking closely at the foliage. Over here is the native Ginger Asarum canadense, which has beautiful velvety buds that come up in the spring and then open out to these lovely velvety leaves all summer long.
Now, there's a plant that a lot of people think of when they think of woodland gardens.
Yes, that's the white Trillium, Trillium grandiflorum. You can see as the flower goes by, it changes from white to pink. And that's a good example of a wildflower that most of what's sold in the nursery trade has been dug from the wild.
That's not good, is it?
No, that's not. And I try to discourage people from planting Trillium in their garden unless they're sure they've gotten a propagated plant. It takes about 7 years to reach blooming size when grown from seed, and not very many nurseries do that, and most of what you see for sale has been dug from the wild.
So it's better to leave that alone for now.
Yes. The lady slipper orchids are another example of a wildflower that isn't being propagated by nurseries, and people should keep out of their gardens also.
So no trilliums and no lady slippers. Are there any trilliums that it's safe to grow?
You can grow them, you just can't buy them. That's the problem. Perhaps that will change someday, but right now most of what's offered for sale has been dug from the wild. Occasionally botanical gardens like Garden in the Woods here, we propagate them and sell them. So there are a handful of places that you can purchase them, but they are not widely available as propagated plants.
And people should never dig up wildflowers in the woods.
No.
Do you have only native plants here in this garden?
No, we don't. We have about 10% of our collection are non-native species. This is a Japanese Solomon seal. Looks quite similar to our native Solomon seal, although this is a slightly variegated form, and it's widely available in the nursery trade. A lot of our native Solomon seal still, unfortunately, is dug from the wild, so I'd rather have people plant this in their garden and leave our native one in the wild until nurseries start propagating it.
That makes a lot of sense. I always worry a little bit about foreign species if they're going to take over, though.
Yes, and there are certain non-native species that you should be careful of because they have shown to be weeds, such as purple loosestrife.
Which is taking over the swamps.
Yes.
Right.
Another example of a foreign species that does well in a wildflower garden is this Japanese jack-in-the-pulpit, Erythema cicoquiana. And many plants from the Asian woodlands and landscape do well in North America, too, because the climate's very similar.
Heather, I love the fact that you've just let that log lie there. You know, so often people think they have to go clean up their woods. They have to drag away the logs, haul away the brush, and those are places where little animals like to live. It's a shame.
Yeah, it is. And what we try to do here is mimic nature. How does nature recycle nutrients? And what is even beautiful when you go walk in a healthy... What you see is trees fall down and they rot, and that's where a lot of woodland wildflowers actually germinate. So we like to leave them here and see them as something that's beautiful.
Especially when there's green lichen like that.
Yeah, and that doesn't take very long for that to start happening. Even a fresh cut log in a couple of years will start to get moss and lichen.
Now, what if I only have sun in my yard? Are there some wildflowers here that would appreciate a sunny spot, too?
Yes, right down the path this way.
Oh, show me. I can see that the hemlock and pine forest really opens up here into a sunny spot.
Yes, and this is where we've planted a lot of our sunny wildflowers. See any here that you recognize?
Well, that looks like pussy toes.
Right, that's an Antineria species.
That actually grows wild in lawns.
It loves sunny, dry conditions, so if you have a dry lawn with poor soil, chances are you have pussy toes in it.
Sometimes it's fun to just let your lawn grow a few inches tall and see what blooms there. You might get some of that. If you look close, the blossoms really do look like little cat's paws.
And if you want to encourage it in your lawn, don't mow it after it blooms. Let it go to seed. Yeah.
Right.
Right behind it is the wild columbine, Acrolegia canadensis. That's a really adaptable species. Here it's growing in full sun. It can also grow in the shade. It will, if it's happy in your sight, it will seed in. It's also a really easy wildflower to grow from seed. It's one I always show people when they want to begin propagating wildflowers.
How would you go about doing that?
Well, the seeds on the columbine ripen in July usually, and you could collect the seeds right then and either sow it right around the base of the plant. That's what way, when they germinate, you would recognize it right around the mother plant. Or if you wanted to, you could store the seeds dry in the refrigerator and then sow them in the spring outdoors, either in a flat or right in the ground.
Well, that sounds easy enough.
It is.
Heather, if people want to find out where they can buy native plants that aren't wild collected and how to grow them properly, where do they find all this out?
Well, at the New England Wildflower Society, we publish a list of nurseries that sell nursery-propagated wildflowers. We also have a cultivation and propagation guide that people can purchase through the mail. And I believe every state in the country has a native plant society. And it's good to find your local native plant society, get involved with them. They have a lot of experts who can tell you about the wildflowers in your area. And they often have annual plant sales.
Oh, that's a good place to get plants.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of people finding out about the plants that are native to their particular part of the country and growing those, because it's good for the wildlife, and it's just somehow more appropriate in the garden. It looks appropriate, and it teaches them something about the world around them. I have certainly enjoyed finding out a little bit more about what New England has to offer in the woods.
Well, come back, because I think there's a lot here that you'd really enjoy.
I think we've just scratched the surface. Thank you.
There's another name for wildflowers. Vegetable gardeners call some of them weeds. Now, I haven't paid much attention to this cold frame since I harvested the last of the spring vegetables. And while my back has been turned, weeds have clothed it. Only in this case, these weed wildflowers are both very desirable. Lamb's quarters and purslane, because they're edible.
It's sort of like a little abandoned lot, isn't it, Elliot? But sometimes the best stuff grows in abandoned lots.
Well, purslane is certainly in the category of the best stuff. If you read the nutritional research that's been done on it by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, purslane contains higher levels of the antioxidants than almost any other food. And so if this is growing for free in your garden, you might as well harvest it and eat it.
Its Latin name is Portulaca, and if you're a flower gardener, that's probably familiar to you as garden portulaca, which is closely related and has much larger, grander flowers than this. In fact, its Latin name is Portulaca grandiflora. But this wild portulaca is an interesting plant. The Native Americans used to use this as a trail snack because these plump, succulent leaves collect some moisture in them, and it's quite refreshing to nibble. I can remember working at a nursery years ago and trying to hold off till lunch, and I fought hunger by nibbling the purslane that I was weeding for my boss.
Now, the lamb's quarters are a relative of beets and spinach, and they can be prepared in the same way that you would prepare beets and spinach if you want to cook them, or to use in a salad. Just cut off the tiny, tender tops, and they're just as delicious as anything.
A great way to cook lamb's quarters is just the way you would cook creamed spinach. But I'd always try to get the smallest, tenderest leaves I possibly could. I think this will be good in a salad, Elliot, for catching it young enough here.
I think it'll be sensational. The one thing we need is a little sorrel, and when I was harvesting strawberries this morning, I saw a wonderful little clump of it in the strawberry bed.
Oh, that's great. The sorrel that Elliot's picking isn't the same cultivated sorrel that we grow on purpose. It's a close relative, and it would grow all over the garden if we let it. It goes on little thin runners, and it'll creep around the top of even a heavy mulch. But it's a great little plant to toss in a salad because it has that same lemony, bitey taste that the cultivated sorrel has. And I like to toss just a handful of it in for that zing. Here's some wild mustard, but it's really past the time when you can harvest it. It would taste quite bitter if I picked it now. Same with these dandelions. They've really passed their season. And here are some red clover blossoms. These are edible, and I can put them in the salad.
Oh, they'll add a nice garnish on top, and I have just enough sorrel to add a delicious piquancy.
Great. Well, let's take these home and get them cleaned up. Boy, there's a salad that grew itself. As the leaves start to come on the trees, the woodland wildflowers are mostly in slightly more open, cleared areas, like the fuzzy white plumes of snakeroot or tall Canada lilies in shades of yellow or red, both of them equally wonderful in gardens. Now, here's a flower that I've seen many times in moist meadows, but is quite happy just in the average soil at the back of my flower garden, Joe Pieweed, named after a Native American herbalist. Or this one. I love seeing beebalm out in the wild. It's a pale lavender shade, Monarda fistulosa, but this hybrid variety is doing great in my garden. A little spready, but I managed to make a place for it because I love it, and so do the bees. Now, over here, I have a collection of plants that are really prairie species, but are equally at home in eastern meadows or in many parts of the country. Purple coneflower, or the yellow prairie coneflower, which I love with those drooping petals, or this tall yellow ox-eye sunflower. Just under that, the spikes of blazing star, lovely fuzzy purple things that the bees just adore. Now, if you want something a little lower that's a native plant, how about butterfly weed? Beautiful orange color, and look how the monarch butterfly caterpillars seem to be enjoying it too. Or this nodding pink onion. This is a native bulb, that will spread into a nice clump with these lovely pink flowers. Or over here, you might even try a native annual wildflower, blanket flower, or gaillardia, a southwestern native. Now, if you want something very strange looking, you might grow this rattlesnake master. This is a very tall plant that starts at the base looking like a yucca, sends up a stalk that's covered with these spiny little balls, and it was once used as an antidote for rattlesnake bite. How about that, Elliot?
Well, I hope I don't have any need for it. Well, what wildflowers do we have to look forward to for the rest of the season?
Well, we've got some other kinds of blazing star coming along, these loopy things, and some tall prairie sunflowers, some ironweed that's going to bloom soon, and over there's going to be some New England asters.
Well, they certainly belong around here.
Yes, they do. But, you know, I think we should plant a lot more wildflowers, and I think we should plant some that are rather rare and specific to Maine.
Well, they would certainly add to the diversity of the yard. We ought to get together this winter and do some research on that.
Absolutely. For now, goodbye and good gardening.
Next on TLC, doing something for your home can be easy, even fun. Check and see here on Homebodies. Then, add value to your home with some serious improvements. The Home Pro shows you how.